A pyroclastic flow racing 3.5 kilometers down the southeastern flank of Semeru volcano in East Java can incinerate everything in its path at temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius, moving faster than a car on the highway. Yet on March 20th, 2026, that exact distance became reality again, when a dense gray ash plume shot 1 kilometer into the sky at 5:28 in the morning, and the ground-hugging avalanche of superheated gas rock and ash surged exactly 3.5 kilometers along the Kobokan drainage, carving a path of destruction that no living thing could survive. But that is not even the real story here, because what looks like another routine outburst from one of Indonesia's most restless volcanoes is actually the latest heartbeat in a system that has been pulsing with near-constant activity since 1967, and the data from the Pusat Vulkanologi dan Mitigasi Bencana Geologi shows this is no isolated flicker. It is the surface sign of pressure building deep beneath a 3,676-meter stratovolcano whose shifting summit craters and growing lava dome are quietly reshaping the entire southeastern flank in ways that connect directly to the broader tectonic forces grinding beneath the Indonesian archipelago. What the monitoring instruments actually reveal is a volcano that refuses to sleep, with daily eruptive events recorded throughout March 2026, producing white to gray ash plumes rising between 400 and 1,800 meters above the summit, drifting north, northwest, and west, while seismic signals captured multiple pyroclastic flows, including the 3.5-kilometer run on the 20th and another visible on webcams at 2:15 on the 21st, with summit incandescence glowing like a warning light that something hotter and more mobile is pushing upward from below. 3.5 kilometers, that distance, is roughly the length of 35 football fields laid end to end. Yet imagine not grass and painted lines, but a roaring cloud of ash and boulders traveling at highway speeds, hot enough to melt metal and turn villages into scorched earth in minutes. And authorities have responded by holding the alert level at 3 on Indonesia's 4-level scale, which means siaga or alert status, with strict warnings to stay at least 5 kilometers from the summit in every direction, 13 kilometers along the southeastern Kobokan drainage, and 500 meters back from the riverbanks all the way out to 17 kilometers southeast, because lahars and expanding flows could suddenly claim even more ground when rains mix with loose volcanic debris. And here's where this story becomes genuinely alarming, because Semeru is not some distant geological curiosity. It sits directly above the subduction zone, where the Australian plate dives beneath the Sunda plate, creating the Ring of Fire's most active volcanic arc. And the ongoing dome growth, combined with frequent explosions, is slowly but relentlessly loading the southeastern flank with material that can collapse without much additional warning, just as it has done in the past. Scientists at PVMBG are careful in their language. They speak of continued eruptive activity and recommend exclusion zones. Yet that careful phrasing carries its own warning, because the seismic network has been picking up hundreds of eruption earthquakes and rockfall signals month after month, with no sign of the system quieting down. And when you translate those numbers into human terms, you realize that every additional cubic meter of lava or ash piled onto the slopes increases the chance that gravity will one day take over in a sudden, unstoppable rush. Picture the people living in the shadow of this mountain in Lumajang and Malang regencies, where tens of thousands make their daily lives farming rice and vegetables, tending small livestock, and harvesting crops on the fertile volcanic soil that Semeru itself has enriched over centuries. In villages like those in Pronojiwo and Candipuro districts, families wake before dawn to the sound of roosters and the distant rumble that has become so familiar it almost feels like background music, yet now that rumble carries fresh urgency, because a 3.5-kilometer pyroclastic flow down the Kobokan drainage brings the hazard zone uncomfortably close to settlements where children walk to school and farmers check their fields, wondering each morning whether today will be the day the mountain decides to send its fiery breath farther than the official maps allow. What question would those neighbors ask if they could see the full seismic record showing persistent activity since the start of 2026, with multiple flows reaching 4 to 6 kilometers in February, and ash plumes occasionally climbing 3 kilometers high on days like the 24th? They would ask, how much longer can we live this close to a volcano that treats 3.5 kilometers as just another Tuesday event? And the honest answer from the data is that no one knows, because prediction remains impossible even with the best instruments. This is not a theory. This is documented geology, because the historical record for Semeru stretches back to at least 1818, with more than 60 eruptive periods, many of which produced pyroclastic flows and lava avalanches that reached the lower flanks. And in December 2021, the mountain delivered a devastating reminder when a sudden dome collapse on the 4th sent pyroclastic flows racing up to 13 kilometers down the Kobokan drainage, triggering lahars that buried homes, bridges, and entire sections of villages in Lumajang Regency, killing dozens, injuring scores more, and displacing over 10,000 people, with ash falling thick enough to collapse rooftops and turn daylight into twilight for days. That event proved what the geological evidence had already shown. The southeastern flank is structurally prone to failure when lava domes grow too large, or when heavy seasonal rains saturate the loose material. And now in 2026, with alert level 3 still in place, and flows repeatedly testing the 3 to 6 kilometer range. The ground beneath residents' feet feels less solid than it did before because the same drainage systems that carried death in 2021 are once again carrying incandescent avalanches. And the question is not whether a larger collapse could happen. The question is when the accumulated pressure will finally overcome the slope stability. Yet even that historical anchor does not capture the full picture because Semeru does not operate in isolation. It is part of a living planetary system where tectonic stress from the subduction zone interacts with magma movement that can be subtly influenced by external forces, including variations in Earth's gravitational tug from the moon and sun, or even distant solar activity that modulates atmospheric and ionospheric conditions in ways scientists are only beginning to measure more deeply. The Indonesian archipelago sits at the convergence of multiple plates, and the constant grinding generates earthquakes that can sometimes coincide with volcanic unrest, transmitting stress through the crust like ripples across a pond. And when ocean temperatures rise or monsoon patterns shift, as they have in recent years, the increased rainfall not only triggers lahars, but adds weight to the volcanic slopes, accelerating the slow creep of material that eventually becomes a pyroclastic flow. What the data actually shows is that Earth functions as one single breathing organism where pressure building hundreds of kilometers beneath Java can ripple outward to affect weather patterns, and where solar wind streams interacting with the magnetosphere might play tiny but cumulative roles in modulating subtle crustal stresses. Though researchers emphasize that direct causation remains under study, the interconnectedness is undeniable and deeply unsettling because it means a flow 3.5 kilometers long today could be the precursor to something far larger tomorrow when multiple systems align. Scientists monitoring Semeru through webcams, seismic stations, and gas measurements report that incandescence at the summit has been visible on multiple nights in March 2026, and the seismic signals for pyroclastic flows have become almost routine, with one event on the 28th lasting 27 minutes, even when visual confirmation was obscured by weather. Translate that duration into human experience. 27 minutes of roaring hot debris cascading down the flank is long enough for entire families to be caught unaware if they happen to be working in the wrong drainage, or if a sudden lahar forms after rain mixes with fresh ash deposits, and in the villages along the Kobokan where several thousand people still live and work. Despite the warnings, daily life now includes the constant background anxiety of checking alert apps and listening for the low-frequency rumble that signals another pulse from the crater. One local farmer might stand at the edge of his field at dawn watching the plume rise and wonder whether the soil that feeds his family will one day be buried under meters of volcanic material, just as it was in 2021 when houses were damaged, schools were affected, and livestock perished in the sudden heat. The system is not dormant, it is awake. And the escalation in emotional weight comes from realizing that even the best monitoring cannot provide precise timing because volcanic processes unfold on timescales that mix seconds with centuries. And while PVMBG maintains the exclusion zones and issues regular updates, the uncertainty hangs over the region like the ash plumes themselves, visible one moment, then drifting away, leaving only questions. Connect this to the broader tectonic picture, and you see how the Australian plate's subduction fuels magma generation at depths of 100 kilometers or more, which then rises through fractures feeding Semeru's persistent activity. And when that magma interacts with groundwater or when the dome grows unstable, the result is exactly the kind of explosive event that sent the 3.5 kilometer flow racing downslope on the 20th of March. Add in the potential for solar-driven changes in atmospheric electricity or geomagnetic fluctuations that some studies suggest could influence microfracturing in the crust, and the picture becomes one of a planet where nothing happens in true isolation. Every eruption is a conversation between the deep interior, the surface plates, the oceans, and even the space environment surrounding us. What makes the present danger feel heavier is the human face staring back from the evacuation shelters and temporary homes where families displaced in previous events, like those in November 2025, when alert level rose to 4 and over 1,000 people, including hikers, were moved to safety. Now watch the latest activity with a mixture of resignation and quiet fear because they know the mountain's rhythm better than most outsiders ever could. In Supatarang village or Oro Oro Ombo, the children play near shelters while parents scan the horizon for signs of fresh plumes. And the older residents remember the 2021 disaster when pyroclastic flows and lahars claimed lives and destroyed infrastructure, leaving scars that have not fully healed. They ask themselves, and anyone who will listen, how many more times can we rebuild when the volcano keeps testing the same drainages with flows that creep ever closer to the safety lines drawn on official maps, and the data offers no comforting reassurance, only the steady drumbeat of continued seismicity and occasional larger pulses. As the intensity builds toward the present moment, consider that the March 2026 activity, with 9 eruptions recorded on the 29th alone and another pyroclastic flow reaching 3.5 kilometers down the southeastern slopes, shows the volcano maintaining its high baseline without any clear decline. And while no major casualties have been reported in the most recent events, the cumulative risk grows with every new deposit of loose material that future rains can mobilize into deadly lahars capable of traveling even farther than the hot flows themselves. The monitoring is in place and detection is possible, but prediction is not. And that single sentence from volcanologists carries the weight of geological history, because Semeru has proven time and again that it can shift from steady puffing to catastrophic collapse in the space of hours, as it did in December 2021, when the death toll climbed and thousands were left homeless. Minutes are not hours when a pyroclastic flow is bearing down, and the people living 13 kilometers downslope along the Kobokan know this truth in their bones because they have seen the bridges damaged and the fields buried, and yet they continue because the land is their life and the volcano is their constant neighbor. The question that lingers as fresh ash drifts across the landscape is whether the current alert level 3 represents a stable plateau, or merely the calm before a larger release when the accumulated strain from plate tectonics, magma recharge, and seasonal weather finally exceeds the threshold that the slopes can bear. This has already happened once the evidence is still there in the ruined structures and the memories of survivors and the geological record etched into the valleys. And so the story refuses to resolve because the volcano keeps breathing, sending its signals through the ground and the air, while the people downstream keep watching and the scientists keep measuring, knowing that the next 3.5 kilometer flow or the one after it could extend just a little farther, or trigger just a little more when the systems align in ways we cannot yet forecast with certainty. Earth remains alive in ways that humble every instrument and every model a single planet whose interior heat tectonic plates and external cosmic influences dance together in patterns that science is still learning to read, and in the shadow of Semeru, that dance feels immediate and personal, because the mountain does not ask permission, it simply moves when the pressure demands it. What happens next is written not in headlines, but in the subtle shifts beneath the surface, the slow creep of the dome, the occasional spike in seismic energy, and the quiet vigilance of those who call this place home. The camera pulls back, slowly revealing how small our plans appear against the scale of a volcano that has been reshaping its flanks for centuries and will continue long after our lifetimes, reminding us that we are guests on a world still very much in motion, and the ground we trust today may speak with a different voice tomorrow.